So today we're going to be back talking about the second part of the final game. Now, in this video we're going to get more into spoilers because, well, I'm assuming that either you have seen this or you want to know whether or not you should see this, or I should say listen to it. And if you want to know whether or not you should be listening to the final game, the answer is yes. You could go listen to my review, or you could just actually go and listen to the final game, which is what I would recommend. So I'm going to, for the purposes of this review, just assume that you have already listened to both parts of the final game that are out right now. And with that said, let's talk about the second part. So, I don't really want to go over the same kinds of things about the casting and all that stuff, because what was true about the cast for the first part is, again, true for this part. They do well. But diving more into what actually happens into this story, it's rather interesting. So, one of my favorite things about this part is that we get a lot of the Master and the Doctor together. And something that the story does, which happens several times in classic Doctor Who, and I really enjoy when it does happen, is that the Master and the Doctor have to work together. And that's one of my favorite things in any Master Doctor story, is when the story gets to a point where it's gone past the Master's control. That happens a lot, and then, or past the Doctor's control, or basically both of their control, and they have to work together to try to solve whatever's happening. And then sometimes the Doctor's a little bit reluctant about that, because wouldn't you be reluctant about working with the Master? But it's always one of my favorite things about any Master Doctor story, when those two characters end up working together, because it is fun, and I love their dynamic, and that dynamic is displayed well within this audio. It's handled well. And as said previously, all of the cast does a good job, as they did in the last part. There's a couple of new characters, and they also do well. So yeah, I really liked that aspect of the story, the Doctor and the Master, and this is taking place as basically the final story for the third Doctor. So, that kind of is important. The Master was important to his era. And also, one thing I do want to say is that I like the use of the Brigadier in this story. I don't always like how he's actually used in the third Doctor's era. I know people love the Brigadier, so I'm not I'm not trying to speak ill of him. But I don't always enjoy how he's used in those stories. In the classic era. Sometimes he's used well, sometimes he isn't. That's how I feel. And in this story, it's one of those cases where the Brigadier is legitimately used well. And there's a couple of lines of dialogue he has that are like, yeah, you're speaking sense. And sometimes he doesn't speak sense, which is a little bit frustrating. But in this one, he did. And the person who performs Brigadier, whose name I cannot recall off the top of my head, does a good job, as does everyone in this story. And this one is a little bit shorter than the last part, but it feels appropriately paced. So the last one was a little bit closer to an hour, and this one's a little bit closer to 45 minutes. And this story doesn't feel like it really wastes your time. It's a relatively calm story for the most part, and it's balanced well in all of its aspects of things that it's got going on in this story, and the reveals that it has are handled well. And the music is good, and for the most part, the music is not actually classic Doctor Who music, but it's the same that it was in that first part, and it works well for this story. So that's one of the things that make it feel slightly different from classic Doctor Who is, of course, the music is a little bit different, but the music works well for what they're trying to do, so I enjoy it. And then there was one part towards the very end of the story, jumping right to the end, where there was this music playing, and I recognized that it was new Doctor Who music, and I was a little bit confused because the tone that had been set was not used. They hadn't, up until that point, which is about 100 minutes into the story total, there hadn't, to my recollection, been any of the classic Who music, except maybe there was at the very start of the episode, possibly. I can't recall that. So it was a little bit confusing, and in fact, it was Dalek music that was playing, and it didn't quite click to me that the reason Dalek music was playing was because Daleks were about to show up, which was the twist at the end of the second episode, which is really exciting because I don't know if I've ever seen a Master story with the Doctor and the Daleks. And I'm not saying one doesn't exist, but I don't think I've actually seen one. Just thinking of the new Who episodes, and, oh, well, I guess there was Magician's Apprentice, But the Master, Missy, is very separate from the Doctor in most of that story, so that's a little bit different. So I'm really excited to see where this goes in the third part of its story. It's exciting to see where they'll go because they're still teaming up, the Master and the Doctor, which is such a fun dynamic to have that I'm just really excited to see what they do with that and how they encounter the situation and how it does ultimately result in his regeneration for this. So yeah, this is a really, really well put together second part in the story. I have no idea at the current time how many parts this story will get, but I hope it gets enough to fully develop it. I don't really know how many that is, but I'm excited for the future parts to come. I assume another part is coming out soon because I'm already really late on this review because reasons. But yeah, it's going really well so far. I'm enjoying this. Overall, I thought this was a solid second part to this story, pretty equal to the first part. These are both really engaging and really well balanced and paced, and the characters are cast well, and the reveals are played at appropriate times, and everything kind of comes together well to create what is ultimately a really solid fan production. And like I said before, you should definitely check this out. It will be linked in the description if I remember to do that. And yeah, really solid, really well put together. I am really enjoying this story, and I think the dynamic between the Master and the Doctor is portrayed really well as it is in Classic Who, and they do a really good job in the story of doing that. And yeah, I thought that part 2 of the final game was solid, and I am going to give the final game part 2 a rating of 8 out of 10. So yeah, that's basically it for today, folks. The final game part 2, another solid one, and I'm assuming that most of you watching this have already seen it because I did say, you know, this is for people that have seen it or listened to it, I should say. Yeah, what do you guys think of the final game? I think it's really solid. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a story that I've always wanted to experience, and I'm glad that these people are taking their time to actually make it so that people can experience it, because even though it's not inevitably going to be exactly as it would have been because it's simply a different format and it's different people making it, it's cool to just see a representation of what it could have been, and I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, definitely check it out if you haven't listened to it, but I really hope you have because we got into spoilers in this one. And yeah, anyway, that's going to be it for now. Whenever the final game part 3 comes out, I will listen to it and hopefully within the coming weeks review it and discuss it because it's good. So yeah, that's all for today, folks. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and have a lovely week.